just waiting for us to be live. It says we are live, so maybe we're actually live. Welcome everyone, this is On Just Restart, and this is, I guess, the On Just Restart podcast that I pretty much guess like every time. There's not like an official name for the podcast, there never is, but I mean, it's the podcast that we do on my channel, On Just Restart, which is also who I am. But anyways, I am joined by my good buddy, Brandon, from Brandon.
From me, yes.
From you. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Well, I mean, given the news, maybe not so good, but you know.
Well, you know, we try and look at the bright side of things here, but we also try to be real at the same time. So we'll be getting into that, but for those who are curious, what could Brandon possibly be alluding to that might even be remotely negative? Well, you see, two things occurred actually last week that are arguably rather negative. One, our precious sequel to Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild has been officially delayed to spring 2023. We got a little update video last week, and we'll be talking about that in detail tonight. Not just the delay, but the extra bit of footage that they gave us. So there's a good and a bad to this little story here.
Slight bit of positive.
Yeah.
There.
And then the other bad to good situation is that E3 has been officially canceled. What does this mean for Nintendo? I don't know. Neither does Brandon, but we're going to be talking about it today, perhaps coming to some sort of consensus. Perhaps you guys in the chat will also help us come to some sort of fair, good conclusion here. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. Nintendo's plan, now that E3 has been canceled, could there be a big Summer Nintendo Direct? And we're going to be talking about Breath of the Wild too. Why it was delayed. If it will be only delayed just this one time and it'll be actually coming out spring 2023. And what about that new footage? What does that mean for the game? All of that tonight. So that's the plan. Now, before we jump into things, let me first kind of just check with you guys here in the chat here, see how you guys are doing. Feel free to say hello. Feel free to put in some questions. We do that. We answer questions in between topics and such. So that is going to stay the case this time around as well. And please, guys, let me know how everything is looking and sounding. I'd appreciate that. Let's see here. Earthbound Man, hello. Okay, good for you. Congratulations. Bingo Bomb, hello. Natsu, howdy. Crazy Scoth, how are you? Joycey J, you need a good podcast to clean up to. Well, hopefully you'll be cleaning and listening well. Rel, hello there, how are you? Jeremy Binns, good evening. Charles Stradell, hello. Having Hope 5, how are you? Happy Monday. Natsu, you're telling me the audio and visuals are great, and I noticed you said that before I even asked. Thank you very much. I hope that is the case. I do believe you.
This is the kind of feedback we like to see.
Charles Stradell, yeah, no problem on the audio or video department. Thank you very much. Additional confirmation there. Thank you. Jeremy Binns, you're loving the topics tonight. Good. I hope you will enjoy them. And I hope you're also doing well. Yes, Having Hope, our precious Breath of the Wild 2. When will it actually come out? Hopefully spring 2023.
Hopefully.
Natsu said, can't wait to hear more on the Master Coral beat up Master Sword. It is like reminiscent of Coral, is it not? Yeah. Nice Sonic, hello there. JMW, I am having actually a fairly decent day. Thank you. Hope you also having a great day. Having Hope 5 says everything looks and sounds great. Thank you very much. Very much appreciative of that. Rel, who needs Breath of the Wild 2 when Nintendo Switch Sports is a few weeks away? JK, kinda, right? Like, I mean, you know, yes, there's the disappointment of Breath of the Wild 2, but then there's also the excitement for Nintendo Switch Sports, right? And there's other games we're going to be talking about tonight. I mean, I've been playing through Kirby and the Forgotten Land, and I gotta tell you, it might be my favorite Kirby game of all time. Now, is that saying much? I mean, there's been some pretty good Kirby games. There's been a lot of Kirby games. None of them are terrible, but I would say most of them fall into the category of just kind of okay, because they're kind of not really doing anything too new or exciting. But, you know, if you haven't played Kirby in a while, it's never really a bad idea to get a Kirby game. But there's a few over the history of the Kirby franchise that have stood out a fair bit. My personal favorites are Kirby and the Crystal Shards and Kirby Canvas Curse. Those are my two favorites. This one, though, it's given me feelings that I had back when I played Kirby Crystal Shards on the Nintendo 64. Like, I have that kind of feeling, and that's a big deal, I think, because that's not the kind of feeling that I get normally nowadays. This kind of game is the kind of game I want from Nintendo more often. Now, I'm not saying I want exactly this from Nintendo with every single game, but something that I felt like was kind of lost over the Wii days and the Wii U days was Nintendo sort of being very fairly ambitious with their different projects and having like these pretty cool, awesome adventures that I could escape to. They had them, not saying they didn't exist, but they became few and far between, especially on Wii U. What did we have? We had Breath of the Wild, which came out when the Wii U was dead. And we had Xenoblade Chronicles X, which was amazing, but also took a while to come out. And
yeah, the game took forever.
That was kind of it, you know? There wasn't, I mean, I'm sure there are other examples, but compared to other systems from Nintendo, that was kind of where we were at. There wasn't too many big, major adventure games that you can sort of just engross yourself into that world and escape into it. But on the Switch, it's different. And Kirby's another game that Nintendo's doing in that vein. And it's the most ambitious Kirby game we've ever seen. Visually, it stands out. The music is awesome. That's kind of one of the reasons why it sort of helps draw me in or reminds me back of the 90s. And it's just a very fun, charming game with lots of variety. And I'm enjoying it a lot. But, well, that tangent aside, yeah, there are a lot of good stuff to enjoy while we wait for Breath of the Wild 2, I would say.
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay. Yeah, is there anything in particular that you're excited about, Brandon?
I mean, Xenoblade Chronicles 3.
Xenoblade Chronicles 3, yeah.
Speaking strictly Nintendo, actually, this is technically coming to Nintendo. So Hogwarts Legacy is probably my #1 most anticipated game now.
But how will it play on Switch? I don't know. I mean, I like playing games on Switch, so if it looks and runs relatively well on Switch, that's okay with me. It doesn't have to be top of the line necessarily, but
I imagine it will be like The Witcher 3 kind of.
Yeah, that's my expectation. So I mean, if I was gonna play it, I'd probably play it on something more powerful. But you know, we don't know yet, so we'll just kind of have to see how it all pans out, right?
Yeah.
Continuing on with the chat here. Let's see. Charles Trudell. Okay, you were speaking to Natsu. I'll let you continue your conversation there. Joy CJ. I'm also here to grumble about Breath of the Wild 2 being delayed, but I believe it's coming for real 2023. You know, it's funny because, like, it's like when they showed off Breath of the Wild 2 for the first time, when they announced that it was officially, that the sequel was in development 2019, even though we know that they were working on Zelda back in 2017, a lot of people, Brandon and I included, you can watch our reaction. We're like, oh yeah, 2020, for sure. Wrong.
Nope.
But then we were like, okay, well, 2021, that'll be the year. Wrong. Granted, COVID. So then we were like, okay, well, yeah, COVID delayed things a year. Okay, 2022, surely they'll be done by then. Wrong. It's coming out spring 2023. Maybe. So
yeah, maybe.
We'll get more into that in a bit. I'm just kind of waiting for people to roll in. Guys, make sure to like the podcast, share it out to others so more people can come and enjoy the show with us. But yeah, I'm gonna continue on the chat for a few minutes as more people roll in, and then we'll dive more significantly into these topics. Having Hope 5, I think because they delayed it to spring 2023, could Breath of the Wild 2 possibly come out March 3rd, Breath of the Wild's 6th anniversary? That, I do think, is a possibility. Some people argue that March 3rd is technically not spring, but I think when it comes to like these dates, typically they just think about very flat calendar months, but then sometimes they don't.
It's not technically spring? Oh, because I guess it's too early in the month.
Yeah. It could happen March 3rd. I don't think it's going to be exactly March 3rd. Is March 3rd even a Friday?
I don't know.
Okay, I went backwards in time. I'm supposed to go forwards. I'm looking at my calendar. March 3rd is a Friday. So that is a time, that is when Nintendo releases their games. So definitely possible that it could be coming out then. Definitely possible. Kelsey, it's Tuesday morning here in Australia, and people keep on saying that Nintendo is saying Breath of the Wild 2 being early 2023 is an April Fool's prank. Really?
It's not an April Fool's
Well,
prank. It
I'll
was,
tell you
like,
this.
2 days before.
I was hoping that they would. I knew. I wasn't. There was never any real hope. But I sort of envisioned in my fantasy world that on April 1st they were gonna be like, oh, surprise, we actually didn't delay it. That was just an elaborate April Fool's joke. Game's coming out tomorrow. You know, like nonsense like that. But yeah, it is not an April Fool's joke. Breath of the Wild 2 is absolutely delayed to spring 2023. For now, it's not coming out any earlier, but it could come out later. We'll talk more about that in a bit. I'm not saying it will. I'm just saying, you know, if we'll get into it. Roll agrees. Kirby is amazing. Hello there, Paul Dunn. How are you? Yes, Having Hope 5. Xenoblade Chronicles 3, I think is gonna be a really good game. Brandon agrees. We are for sure excited for that. Absolutely. Charles Trudell again today. Saw some people on the web said that Nintendo was doing their worst games right now, but I think can only think of 2 Mario Sports games and forget the rest. I honestly think Nintendo is doing pretty much better than they ever have. They are outputting games, quality releases that I feel like are worth investing in at more than once a month, really. It's just quality release after quality release. And a lot of these games, if not being the best in their franchise, they are contenders to be the best in their franchise.
For sure.
Metroid Dread, Kirby and the Forgotten Land, Breath of the Wild, Mario Odyssey, the various the Mario sports titles, that's maybe a little bit more debatable, but either way,
good enough. I mean, like, way better than what we were getting the Wii generation for sure.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would argue Splatoon 2 is better than Splatoon 1, and then we're getting a Splatoon 3, so, you know, there's that. Xenoblade 2 and Definitive Edition, and we're getting Xenoblade Chronicles 3, which seems to be like a culmination of all Xenoblade there. The list goes on. The Smash Ultimate, Mario Kart Deluxe, like, I'm gonna stop because it's not even the topic for tonight. But Nintendo's just doing great.
Yeah, I feel like if you are upset at Nintendo's output, it's likely that you're just upset that they're not making the specific games that you want, because there are definitely high quality releases. Whether they interest you or not, that's up to you, of course. But you can't deny that they are releasing them. Yeah,
there's. I mean, you just gotta look at the sales. Like, just straight up by the numbers, Nintendo's selling more software than they ever have. So, you know, there you go. Like, pretty much all these franchises are having record sales on this system. Part of that is because of the Switch effect, sure, but also part of that is because these games are really good. So, you know, definitely I think Nintendo is performing very well.
I would agree.
iSonic's asking, do you think that Breath of the Wild 2 will have a new version of the Switch launch with it after the delay, and is it the main reason? Personally, I don't think so, but what are your thoughts? So I actually jotted this as a video. I jotted this down as a video idea earlier today. I'll probably put together some more information for that. I'm not convinced either way at this point, but I will tell you this. It's an eerily familiar situation, because if I remember correctly, back in 2016, when Breath of the Wild, the original, was slated for 2016, in that same year, around March, they put out a video announcing its delay. What month did they announce the delay for Breath of the Wild 2? Just a few days ago, like right before April 1st, in March.
Yeah.
And Breath of the Wild came out March 2017, basically spring 2017, and now we're getting Breath of the Wild 2, supposedly spring 2023, 6 years later. It's a very eerily familiar situation. And the other interesting thing to consider is that since we're coming up on the 6th year anniversary next spring for the Nintendo Switch, that's 6 years. That's longer than most home consoles' lifespans before the next system comes out. And considering the recent Nvidia leak and just the rumors in general, it's not that much of a stretch, really, to think that maybe that they did delay Breath of the Wild 2 for a new system. And I'll even say this, kind of like I'm like letting rip all the material I have for this video, but I'll do more research. I'll put it more together. But another thing, and I have to go, I'm paraphrasing here. I'm not even paraphrasing. I'm paraphrasing in my brain and then relating to what I interpret of that paraphrasing. But the point is, from what I remember, the verbiage used as to the reasoning, they don't really tell us exactly why Breath of the Wild 2 is being delayed. So if it ends up being for the system, a new system that's coming out, it wouldn't be a lie. I don't think they straight up said, hey, we're delaying the game specifically so we can enhance the experience more. So they did say that they're doing a whole bunch of things, and they inferred that's why, but they don't very clearly, concretely state the exact reason why. They simply said we decided to. And I'm not saying one way or another. I have to go back, look at what was said, maybe look at a Japanese translation as well. So again, the actual video on this topic will be more research. There'll be more information there. But point is, I think there is a possibility that Breath of the Wild 2, at least in part, might have been delayed so it can launch with a new system. I don't think that's a stretch.
Possible.
Yeah. Now,
I think if
I'm
it's
sure
a
there's
next generation system, like, we need to hear about it soon. Because when we heard about the delay for Breath of the Wild, I don't remember exactly when. It was very close to that. When they started talking about the NX. And
10 to knock, they did put out a video announcing the delay for Breath of the Wild. It was a video announcement. You can look it up on YouTube.
Right. If there's going to be a next generation system, they'll have to talk about it within the next couple months. Possibly before or around E3 time. If it's like a Switch Pro, then they can wait much longer than that. But I do think if they need to talk about it real quick, if there's a next generation system coming out spring 2023.
Yeah, I mean, it depends, because there are differences, right? Like, to your point, like, one, that back in 2016, the year was dead. There was nothing to play on Wii U. There was 3DS was still kicking, but it was, a little different. Switch, on the other hand, we're looking at a year that's dense with games. Dense with games. And it would be weird for Nintendo to announce a new system this year to come out with it next year, because that could impact sales of their current Switch systems for the holiday. So I'm not entirely sure how they're going to handle that timing. Maybe they don't announce it this year and they announce it like January or something, and it depends. I mean, how do you handle this? I don't know. At some point or other, you do have to announce new hardware, right? When's the right time to do it?
Making something new, like, obviously.
Yeah, no, the other thing is that it may not be something that straight up outclasses Wii. I mean, not Wii, but Switch. And when I say that, I mean it will, but it might be more of like a mid-gen refresh. Like, we might be looking at a system that might be next-gen, might be half-gen, might be somewhere in the middle. Like, not just from a power perspective, but from a transition perspective and a compatibility perspective. We're not entirely sure how Nintendo's going to handle things this time around. So there's a lot of ifs. And I do feel like early 2023 is early, based off how well Switch is performing. But given that it'll be well over a year by that point since Switch OLED, I can't outright just refute it entirely in my brain. Like, I think it's within the cards for Nintendo to do that. This year,
I think
it
would be strange, though, if they wanted to do a new console in spring again, because they only really did that last time because they had to. This time, they don't have to delay Breath of the Wild only a couple months. If they really wanted to, they could have said just 2023 or holiday 2023. Like, they could have delayed it a whole year to launch it alongside hardware in the fall. Like, they didn't have to do this. And I'm not sure that they necessarily I don't know if they want to do a spring launch or not. I don't really know what their thinking is on that, how that might affect things.
I don't know, it's tricky. Because, like, we don't know what they're thinking. I will tell you that from what I've heard behind the scenes, this is not like any sort of recent thing, but just what I've heard from behind the scenes from like the marketing department and such, like they hear from Nintendo and things change like every week. Like it's like something might be happening one week behind the scenes and then it's a whole other thing the next week, right? Like, so there's a lot of fluctuation and change. So, you know, it's probably crazy. There's probably a number of variables that they look at. Maybe some of them are logical, maybe some of them are illogical. You know, that's a debate that we can't even have because we don't know what the reasoning is behind these decisions.
Right.
But point is, I've heard, and I'm sure other people can vouch for it, that there's a lot of fluctuation with what they're actually going to do exactly within a year or the year after. So, you know, it's kind of crazy what could be going on there because you look at all the games that are already slated for this year, it was looking dense. Like, we are getting Xenoblade Chronicles 3 in September, and we have this open world Pokemon game probably coming out in November, right? And then there's Bayonetta 3, and then there's Mario Rabbids Kingdom Battle, or Sparks of Hope, I mean. And there's the rumor of Metroid Prime remake, right? And then what else? Like, there's a lot of stuff. So, you know, it's tricky. And maybe Nintendo was like, you know what? Since everything else has come together here, like maybe at one point they were thinking, yeah, for sure, Breath of the Wild 2. But as they came into this year and their other development projects sort of came closer to completion, they were like, oh, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is going to make it for September? Okay, let's put that in there. Oh, Pokemon Company and Game Freak will have their open world Pokemon game ready for this November? Okay, interesting. So, you know, like maybe like at first they were like, okay, Breath of the Wild 2 for this year, but then they see how things are panning out with their other projects and they're like, we don't need for this to come out right now. We can afford to push it, you know? So maybe that was a consideration, but maybe the other consideration is
that definitely could have been
strictly, hey, there's a lot of things we're doing here. We could just spend 4 more months to polish things up. They could do that. It could have been that. It could have been both. A third reason could be, well, hey, look, we have this Switch Pro. We're thinking about launching it in the first half of 2023. Might as well delay this so we can push the hardware with this new Zelda, make it look and run as great as it can, show it off. So maybe it's a combination of reasons, right? We don't know. But I think all of those things are possibilities.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I would be interested if they had hardware. I would also be interested if they launched hardware later in the year and Breath of the Wild still came on the spring. Because I feel like that's a possibility that
absolutely
could happen. I don't know why they would do this.
Well, the other thing...
But then again, they're doing all kinds of strange things. You know, I was really dead set on them having a completely next generation Switch, but I don't know if they will even... like how they'll define what a next generation Switch even what that means to them, because I have a feeling this will be heavily not only backwards compatible but forwards compatible, with games coming out being able to play on the original Switch as well for I would probably think at this point a couple of years at least, which is
is kind of like new territory for Nintendo.
So it does seem to be where the industry's kind of leaning towards, at least right now. It's hard to say because a lot of it's due to, like, you know, chip shortages, people not actually being able to get the new consoles, but, you know, like, games are still coming out for the PS4 and the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One.
What gets kind of tricky, right, is that, like, if you just follow patterns, you're going to get a lot right, but there are going to be things you're going to get wrong, too. For example... I think most people in our space were thinking that we were not going to get a mainline Pokemon game exactly in November this year. Like, even though it's predictable, because that's been the pattern. Despite the pattern, a lot of us were thinking no, because, well, there was a change in that pattern, because they literally had a mainline game come out this January. Yet, despite all that, within the 3-year interval, they are bringing out Generation 9, and they're not delaying it to like spring or something like they're doing for Zelda. They're coming out Generation 9, which was, they followed the pattern, right? And then another pattern people were looking at was like, well, for example, while I predicted and I've been arguing that Breath of the Wild 2 would not be delayed, I've also acknowledged that, hey, there is a history of Zelda delays, so if you follow the pattern, well, that would suggest that this is going to get delayed as well. But I thought it was different because, well, they started development on this project in 2017, and it is a sequel. Yet despite that, now the development cycle is significantly longer than the initial Breath of the Wild.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Which is,
I just am surprised they announced it so early. Why would you do that, Nintendo?
So, but that's kind of another thing that's sort of a head scratcher here, right? Because, like, so literally, like, all right, let me start over. Let me restart. Okay, I'm not gonna do that again. I'm sorry. We have interviews from late 2017, holiday 2017, like around the time that I can go back and check the specific dates, but I can say with confidence there are interviews, in at least articles of interviews in December 2017 talking about how they're already working on the next Legend of Zelda to follow up Breath of the Wild. This is shortly after the release of the Champion's Ballad Wave 2 of the Breath of the Wild DLC. That's a fact. Now, was that development in earnest as Nintendo used for their wording for Breath of the Wild 1 when they started that in 2013? Which you may notice as kind of peculiar because Skyward Sword came out at the end of 2011. Did they wait a whole year to start development for Breath of the Wild? That's where it's kind of a little hard to understand, because what is working on the next Zelda versus developing the next Zelda?
Right. I thought that time would be lessened because they decided to go with a sequel, but we don't know when they decided that. But I would imagine it was pretty soon after.
So if we go back to the interviews of them working on the next Zelda in 2017, they could have been bouncing around ideas, but they weren't developing in earnest until a little bit later, right? Which could explain some of the difference in development time here. But even then, right? So let's say if we take that into consideration, we know based off what let's assume all right, so the development in earnest phrasing they used for Breath of the Wild from early 2013. Game came out early 2017. So that's what, a 4-year development cycle basically. Or maybe add a couple months because January 2013 versus March 2017, which is the beginning of March, but basically 4 years if or in a month if you round down. They announced that they were developing Breath of the Wild 2 in 2019. If they were working on concepts for Breath of the Wild or whatever it's going to be in 2017, maybe they start sometime 2018, right? But even if it's not, let's say they started early 2019, which is probably not true, but let's say early 2019, they come out early 2023. Like, that's literally another 4-year gap. So best case scenario, it has the exact same amount of development time as its original, which is still very weird.
It is very odd.
But again, it's probably I don't know, but I'm assuming it's actually been longer. Now, another thing to consider though is the pandemic. How much did that impact things? We've assumed at least a year, but maybe it's been more. That does explain a lot.
Could be.
Yeah, so I mean that's another consideration here. But either way, they're taking a long time with this game. It should have been faster, but it's taken longer. I'm gonna assume probably more than one reason, right? As is the case with a lot of things. So it's just, did they just delay it for the game, or are there other reasons? That's where it's weird, because you would have thought it would have been ready. You would have thought that for sure, with this amount of time, with it being a sequel, with it being still in Hyrule, that they would, and literally we're using a whole bunch of assets because it's based off the same art style and everything. Like, you would assume that, yeah, they could get this done quickly, but they're not. So
you would assume that if they announced in 2019, it would be out before 2023.
And this is not me complaining. It's just me wondering why. Like, what is it exactly, right? We can continue to talk about maybe it's for a new system. Maybe it's simply because they have a whole bunch of games ready for this year. But what's kind of interesting is that when we take a look at what they told us, Aonuma did talk about how this world, as we've talked about in various videos and discussions beforehand, it's going to go beyond just the land of Hyrule and the sky of Hyrule. They literally say that in the trailer to say it's gonna go this world is gonna go beyond that. What does that mean? Well, could mean underwater, as Brandon has talked about before. It could mean underground, as a number of people, myself included, have theorized based off the first trailer. It could also mean parallel worlds. It could mean a dark world. It could mean perhaps even higher than the sky, right? Now, what could that be? You know, there's a number of different things it can do from a space perspective. And when I say space, I don't mean outer space. I just mean like, you know, 3D space, right? But also maybe
the moon
a little
doesn't
bit of
come
space.
to us. We go to the moon.
Maybe the moon, like, you know, like they do that in Odyssey. But anyway, like there's that. But then he also does mention like gameplay and mechanics and things of that nature. And there's a specific word he used. It doesn't necessarily matter. It's just kind of like there are going to be different events and interactions and gameplay stuff, like something along those lines as well. Like, what does that mean? I mean, it could be more attacks, more different things you can do, different types of side. There's so many different things. Like, we already know that they're going to give us new powers and abilities. So that's already confirmed. There's probably going to be more. That's an easy assumption, right? So all of those things could go a long ways towards making this game a lot bigger, a lot more different than what we've seen so far. And I think that's kind of another interesting consideration here. Based off what we've seen in terms of gameplay, this game does not look that different from Breath of the Wild 1. Right. You could easily argue, say we didn't know about what it was supposed to be, if you just show someone the footage and you don't tell, and you, like, someone might assume, oh, that's DLC, you know? Like, if they don't know what the game is, they don't know what Breath of the Wild is or Zelda, they just know about video games in general and how there's DLC, it looks like it could be DLC. It's set in the same environment, there are some extra areas in the sky, and Link has a few extra powers, but it's all based off the same sort of world. Usually that's how DLC is. So, that's kind of something to consider here. Not to mention, we know, also based off interviews, that Breath of the Wild 2, according to Onuma, like, they decided to do this. Actually, I'm not sure if it's Onuma, but the Zelda team, they decided to do Breath of the Wild 2 based off a lot of the DLC ideas. So that's another thing to consider here. Maybe initially Breath of the Wild 2 was going to be a DLC. And they sort of expanded upon it. Like, oh, well, there's more we can do here, right? So, it's just interesting from what we've seen so far. It didn't seem that significant of a change for a whole other new Zelda game that's had a development cycle that's longer than the original when it's supposed to be a sequel using the same engine. So there's probably a lot that they haven't shown us.
I'm sure there's just tons and tons of stuff that they have not showed us. I mean, we've barely seen anything.
I think the phrase "we've just seen the tip of the iceberg" may not even be an appropriate expression of what's going on here. Like, the tip, we might only have a speck of the tip of the iceberg here. Like, so this game has to be huge. Either that or Nintendo has just kind of wet the bed. But I don't think they have. This is one of the best development team. It's not. First of all, we were literally just talking about how Nintendo has pretty much had one banger after another. But not only have they been really good with pretty much all their games in this generation, but the Zelda team is arguably not only Nintendo's best development team, but maybe just the best development team in the world. So they probably haven't wet the bed. They probably haven't just been terrible.
Sure, it's fine.
Yeah, they're probably actually doing a really good job, and there's just a lot of really cool stuff here, right? Like, is it possible that with the COVID and just their massive sort of expectations for this game, that they've gone through a lot of development trouble and they really haven't gotten that much done, and that's why they're delaying it? It's possible. And obviously COVID definitely impacted things, but like, I don't think it's likely to assume that this game is suffering in terms of them getting it done. Because maybe if it was the original, but it's not the original. They already have an established engine in place. They already have an established world in place. So with that in mind, a lot of the hurdles have already been solved and figured out with the original. Can there be some for the sequel? Absolutely, but the odds of there being even more that are insurmountable for the sequel just seems to be really unlikely.
I have a feeling that they really did push their engine in new ways for new mechanics we haven't seen yet. And that's part of why it's taking so long. I mean, just imagine, like, what if they do want to do underwater? Well, now you got to create a whole underwater physics engine. Like, that's a whole other thing.
to make
If
it
you wanna
work
do
naturally.
different things with, yeah. Maybe
You know-
there's something they want to do up in the sky that requires different physics as well. Who knows?
I'm glad you
Maybe
brought up the
there's-
water, Brandon, because I know we've talked
Yeah.
about this before, but like there are a lot of things underwater that make you think that perhaps at one point or another they were debating having our underwater exploration.
Some of the underwater areas are really pretty.
Unusually
barely even
unusually
see them most of the
detailed
time.
for something you can't really access at all, right?
Yeah.
And you can sort of access them through magnesis or stasis. Like you can throw items down there and you can interact with them. I think there's even like
Right.
one chest in the game that is not accessible that is underwater.
Yes, there is.
Which could simply be an artifact of perhaps simply testing, but it also could perhaps be them considering perhaps water exploration. Actually, I would argue, regardless, that is a consideration of maybe them putting in the game, because if they were testing for underwater
so.
stuff, that means they were at least at one point or another thinking about maybe doing that stuff. Now, maybe they didn't go very far into like their planning to actually have underwater exploration, but it must have at least been a thought, because, well, a lot of Zelda games have underwater exploration. That's not really that crazy. Point is, I think there's enough evidence to suggest that it was thought about at least, and yeah, there could be that could be one of the ways that they're going to be improving upon things. So to your point, Brandon, that underwater exploration is very tricky, and with this crazy physics, like that makes it a whole other level of tricky.
Yeah. There definitely could be something that they had to change with the physics engine to make that work better. Maybe
Yeah.
why we didn't have it in the first game, they just didn't have time.
And actually, since we're talking about the physics engine, Breath of the Wild, the reason it was delayed was because of the physics engine. Because of how complicated and sophisticated that is, especially for the weaker hardware of the Wii U, they had a lot to work around and polish and fix up.
Oh, yeah.
So, that caused a delay for Breath of the Wild. So if they're trying to build upon that engine more so, which obviously they are to some extent, yeah, maybe that does create some complications. It has to. There's just like, you add in some element that can create a myriad of other things that can occur that could spiral out of control and explode everything. That's a metaphor,
Yeah.
but like things can go crazy with physics.
I
We've
don't know,
seen
with
some
Breath of the
nuts
Wild,
things.
Maybe sometimes it's not
Yeah.
a metaphor.
Yeah, true. Sometimes it's not a metaphor for Breath of the Wild. That's absolutely right. So that could have something to do with it. And we know from the patents that they're doing some crazy things. We've seen in the second trailer, they do show Link sort of phase through platforms, and we've seen patents of that more so, which suggests that it's not going to be like a scripted event, but actually something that you're going to be able
I'm
to
sure
do.
The Q&A testing for that must be insane.
Yeah, so it's actually a
Making sure
really
you don't
cool
just
thing.
clip into an object and get stuck in the environment somewhere.
That just, there's so much that can be done there, like, and to what extent will it actually be usable? Considering that there's patents of it like being used for different platforms, you might be able to use it almost anywhere.
Right.
And if that's the case,
show like uneven platforms and like coming out at different angles and stuff. So
right, the patent does like show like how that can impact things for sure. So yeah, there's just like a lot that could sort of transpire from that, to your point. So that's something that they got to be working on. And we've seen the other patent that shows like Link having different sort of animations in the air, and these are actually like a different attacking animations that we've never really seen before. I can't think of many games that would have bow controls to this extent. So that could be cool. Not only, I mean, it probably will be cool, but that has that's a whole other layer of like combat in the air. Like that's gonna create a number of potential like complications. And then we still know about the time stasis thing that also can create a number of new interactions that can just spiral out of control. And that's just what we know about. There's got to be more. 100% more.
One new power.
Not 100% as in double, but 100% as in like metaphorically, like a lot more. For sure.
So we know like two of the kind of replacement for the Sheikah Slate abilities. Two of them. Well, I don't know if the one going through the ground will be considered one of those.
Yeah.
But we have the time stop rewind, and then we got the ability to go like through the ground.
What do you think of the have you seen? I'm sure you've seen the footage a few times, but have you noticed how on Link's hand it's like a rune, almost like a Monado?
Right. I have seen that. Yes.
I think that
seems like those are going to be switching depending on what
Yeah.
kind of ability you're using.
it's pretty much a hard confirmation that it's a replacement for the Sheikah Sleeve. It's not actually a hard confirmation, but it's additional evidence.
Obvious.
Yeah, it is. I agree. It's very
We've
obvious.
not seen not one bit of Sheikah tech in any of the footage.
Yeah. So I mean, and that's very likely going to change, I would say, based off what ability he's using.
The symbol, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. I definitely agree. It will be just like the Monado.
Which is cool. That's cool
It is
stuff.
cool.
But since we're already talking about like the hand and such, how do you think this impacts the sword? The Master Coral.
Right. The Master Coral, yes. Yeah, I have a feeling that my current theory is that Ganon attacks Link. Link tries to use the Master Sword against him. For some reason, it just doesn't work. It breaks, and Ganon tries to crawl. His power crawls over the sword onto his arm and starts fucking his arm up. And then he gets something. I guess that green hand thing might have been what saved him there, and put that armor over his hand that seems to be kind of holding back this disease that seems to be crawling up his body.
Yeah, it's tricky because from the first trailer we see a shot of the green sort of covering Link's hand. He looks like he's in pain. You could based off the footage, you could interpret that as the green hand is what's causing the damage. But it's a random shot that's out of order. We don't see all the details.
And the green hand seems to save him at one point. So.
Right, so it seems contradictory, but what you suggested does make sense, but we don't have evidence of that necessarily, right? Like we don't have hard evidence, at least. You can infer.
Right.
But we don't know. And the other thing is that was a pretty early on trailer. Perhaps those events have changed somewhat since. Either way, though, it's clear Ganondorf has arisen. Things went awry. Zelda was lost into an abyss, and Link and the Master Sword took a great deal of damage during that event. I think all of that is a fairly likely interpretation.
Oh yeah, definitely. I would agree. I'm just concerned, or not concerned. I'm wondering why the Master Sword is broken.
From a gameplay perspective,
you tried to use it and it broke.
Yeah, so there's
that's a big thing. Yeah, like how do you use a broken Master Sword? We don't see him using any other weapons
yet.
Yet.
From a gameplay perspective, the obvious is they need to give Link a bit of a reset, right? And if he already has a Master Sword, what's the explanation for being able to use it for just using other weapons? Like, if you already have the Master Sword, it's all powered up, like, why bother using other items and weapons that are weaker, right? Like, it just doesn't make sense. But if you break the Master Sword, then, and maybe the game's about fixing it.
Nintendo really is just showing us, why Link's gonna be nerfed again.
Right, they had to
nerf. Look at him, his arm's all fucked. Look at his hair, it's long. Clearly, he's not doing anything.
From a purely gameplay and design perspective, they needed to nerf Link and the Master Sword. They had to. So they did that, and they created story reasons for why. Now, what are those story reasons? I mean, let's go back to you expressed interest in it earlier, right? Let's kind of dive more into that. So we both agree, and I think most people in the chat agree, that guy in the zombie mummy thing is Ganondorf. That's like if we're gonna debate stuff, let's not debate that. Like, that's pretty much if nothing is confirmed, but it is. It just is. It has the yellow jewel that's always on Ganondorf's head. He has a hole in his chest, which is, if it's not straight up the same Ganondorf that took the scar in Ocarina of Time, it's an at least illusion. I mean, Twilight Princess. It's at least an allusion to it. And he has the Gerudo robes, the red hair. It's a Gerudo male that's emanating the malice of Calamity Ganon. Like, that's about as close to Ganondorf as you can get without it.
Yeah, it seems pretty obvious. If that's
Right.
not Ganon, I will eat my hat. then.
Now, where there's
some.
some debate is if it's literally the exact same Ganondorf that we saw in Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, and The Wind Waker, or if it's a reincarnation. Like, that is there's some debate. I think most likely it is literally the same Ganondorf, because the whole point of Breath of the Wild's story is that Calamity Ganon became Calamity Ganon after several generations of failings of trying to conquer Hyrule as a single entity. Gave up on that, gave up his physical form, and became Calamity Ganon. But that physical form still exists in Breath of the Wild 2, and that's what's coming back to life, right? So like, we pretty much agree on that.
Oh yeah, definitely agree.
So this Ganondorf has been around for many games and generations,
Well, like tens of thousands of years.
building up a hatred, right? Like, his hatred has become like a malice. And actually, you go back to Twilight Princess, he was already taking on like a gaseous sort of malice-like form. They literally, I think they even literally mentioned his power to the effect of something like malice in Twilight Princess. So they kind of took that idea and ran with it with Breath of the Wild. But I think there's an evolution of Ganondorf, right? Like, I think he gets progressively stronger over time. And because he is a reincarnation of Demise, and the whole Curse of Demise is kind of based off his hatred, I think with Ganondorf sort of failing generation after generation, he builds up more sort of like angst and jealousy and envy and anger, that becomes his power. I think that contributes to it. So there's like this rage, and I think that it's just gotten stronger and stronger over time because he's just literally failing all the time. He's just continuously getting more and more pissed, right? He's like, Jesus, every time, every 100 or 200 years, this kid in a green hat and some blonde girl screw up my plans every time. Like, he just getting angry. He's just tired of it.
Kid's not even in fashion.
And he literally refuses to die as well. Like, he just doesn't die. Link and Zelda, you know, they live their lives, they pass away. It may not even be the same Link and Zelda. It's like just a reincarnation of like at least that role. But this Ganondorf sticks around, and I think that has a lot to do with how strong he is. And if you think about it in that way, right? Literally, his hatred, his malice that's just kind of pouring out of his chest wound as a mummy is enough to basically completely destroy Hyrule and almost take it over. It creates a dystopian Hyrule that has no hero for 100 years. That's just like the smoke coming out of his body. What can the actual source do?
This is angry aura.
Right. The actual source, as you suggested, Brandon, you literally said, breaks Link's hand, curses him, and shatters the Master Sword. Or not it shatters, looks like he like corrodes it, like instantly. So I think there's just like a substantial power difference here, maybe. So, you know,
maybe we'll actually have to, I don't know, get the Triforce or something. Maybe that's what we need again.
Well, there was the Triforce was missing throughout most of Breath of the Wild until the end, and just Zelda had it. Where's the Triforce of Power from Ganon? Well, Ganondorf has been underground all this time, so maybe that's why there's no that. But what about Link? Link never shows the Triforce of Courage.
We only ever see the entire Triforce as a whole.
Yeah. Well, and I've talked about this theory before, and I know you know of it, Brandon, but like, so the first trailer shows like those green swirls, right? There's like that motif of green. The Sheikah, which are missing, use like a blue-like energy, right? Blue matches with Neru, or the power of the Triforce of Wisdom, which is correlated with Zelda, right? And the Sheikah look after Zelda throughout generations. That's their role. They're missing, along with Zelda in Breath of the Wild too, because she falls down a hole. But then you have the Malice, which is like a purplish red. You have the Yiga, who also are garbed in red, and the the Dinral is the fire. that's like that red motif, and the power, the Triforce of Power is that's associated with red. So we see Ganondorf in like this red dark mouse, especially in the second trailer, right? And all of that, the Yiga support and worship Ganon and Calamity Ganon and Ganondorf. So you have that. So you have the red side, Triforce Power, Ganondorf, right? And the Yiga. You have the Sheikah, the blue Zelda, Triforce of Wisdom. But what's the green? In the first trailer, when you reverse the footage, there seem to be whispers, and there's been debate about the interpretations of what those whispers are, but there are whispers, there are voices, and there are texts that mean something, but we don't know what it means. And it's in a ruin that looks to be of Zonai ruins, which is an ancient hidden missing tribe, a warrior tribe. And Link, throughout the different Zelda games but Breath of the Wild, is garbed in green. The one game he's not garbed in green, at least, I mean, you get a tunic eventually, but it's like at the end of the game.
Yeah.
Or, amiibo stuff. But beyond that, it's just like, it's a blue tunic. Throughout most of the game, he doesn't have the green, right? He doesn't have the Triforce of Courage either. But in the Breath of the Wild 2, you see his green energy, you see these ruins of the Zone, a missing tribe. Link now has his mysterious power that glows on his right hand where the Triforce would be for previous Links. So maybe a lot of this, it does have to do with the different sort of sides. You have the Triforce of Power, red, that side with Ganondorf. You have the Triforce of Courage, Link, green, maybe the missing Zonai, and all of that. And then you have the Sheikah, who are the blue, the Zelda, the Triforce of Wisdom. Like, there is, like, I think, a pretty clear-cut sort of, like, three sides here. And maybe, I mean, that could just be what we see, and that it's not really addressed in the game. But there's a chance maybe that it is. And we see Link get the Triforce of Courage, to your point, Brandon. Maybe it has something to do with gaining more power so he can defeat this ultra-strong Ganondorf. And ultimately does mean he has a Triforce of Courage and he fights Ganondorf, who has a Triforce of Power at the end of the game.
Yeah, could definitely be that Ganondorf finds the Triforce of Power at some point as well. He doesn't have it at the beginning, though, so it'll be interesting to see how he acquires it and how they pull that into the narrative. Yeah.
But I mean, that kind of goes to a theory that I put out for a video like a few days ago, just talking about the main objective for Breath of the Wild, or at least one of them. And in the video, I basically talk about how we see the Master Sword is damaged. There's a history of different Zelda games having the main objective having something to do with building up the Master Sword, forging it or making it stronger. Very clearly, they're doing something with the Master Sword in that footage. It's glowing. Ganondorf is ultra strong. I don't think it's a stretch to say that this game, one of the main objectives, if not the main objective, is to restore the Master Sword and perhaps make it stronger than ever before. So, maybe that has to do with the Triforce of Courage, as you suggested, Brandon.
Maybe so. I will say that symbol on his hand, it glows. It's got this golden glow to it, and I was like, "Is that the Triforce?"
Right.
When I first saw it, I was like, "Is that the Triforce?" But no, it's just this kind of symbol. So.
But hold on a second, though. Hold on a second.
They seem to have the same kind of golden glow.
It's not the Triforce, but what if it becomes a Triforce? Mm-hmm. Like, can you imagine a moment? Like, there's different like glyphs that appear there, right? But what if there's a point in the game where it just becomes a straight like a triangle? Like, it's a moment, because like us Zelda fans, we're playing through Breath of the Wild too. Say we're like 75-80% throughout the game, and there's a big like story beat moment where there's some sort of struggle, and whatever Link does, like, he accomplishes something, and it leads to that sort of glyph. Like, it's showing up as a triangle, suggesting the Triforce of Courage is finally within him. Like, that's how it shows up. I mean, if it's going to show up, how else would it show up? Because his hand is all covered.
With the two other grayed out Triforces in position as well. I think that would just look more aesthetically pleasing, but that's kind of just random.
Well, it could happen. I mean, they could still do that little design within that circle.
Right.
On his hand.
I'm not saying that's. Yeah, I'm just saying that's what I would like if they did that.
Yeah. But wouldn't that be like a cool moment though? Like, to see that? I feel like that's.
I think it would.
Considering that they already have a hand that shows different signs on the hand, why not eventually show off the most common popular sign we've seen on hands for Link throughout the Zelda series?
Right.
Like, when you think about it in that way, it seems almost obvious that that's eventually going to happen, right? I could be wrong, but I'm just saying, like, I feel like there's a decent chance that at some point in Breath of the Wild 2, that weird armament on that little circle is going to show a triangle.
It's definitely not out of the question.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be too surprised if the Triforce ends up playing at least a somewhat bigger role in this game, considering it was like mostly absent for all of the first one.
Yeah. It kind of makes sense to kind of like, yeah, they didn't go to it now. And on that note, though, if Link is going to be going around restoring the Master Sword, how does he go about doing that? Where is he going? There's already been theories that there's going to be sort of like a return of temples and dungeons. Perhaps one of the ways they're going to be expanding the world of Breath of the Wild is by unearthing a lot of the ancient temples and dungeons. And in those temples and dungeons, some of them are about reforging, restoring the Master Sword, which Link will be visiting because that'll be a part of his sort of grand mission.
I mean, I wouldn't be too surprised. There's got to be some way you get the Master Sword from, Coral Sword to not Coral Sword.
Yeah. So, I think that's kind of like... It seems to be kind of be coming together. Like all the puzzle pieces seem to be fitting here, right? We don't know. This is all theory and speculation, but I think it does kind of make decent sense. But let's... unless there's something you want to specifically address, Brandon, I want to check in with the chat.
Well, we can check in the chat first, but I was curious if you thought that Fi was going to return, because people have been seeing the Master Sword glowing blue. That's generally what it does right before Fi comes down and talks to you in Skyward Sword. Right.
I mean, in Breath of the Wild 1, we hear her voice. And the voice sort of guides Zelda to take Link to the Shrine of Resurrection to save him, right? Like, so Fi does have a presence in Breath of the Wild 1 already. And considering that they just remastered Skyward Sword, and they sort of linked that sort of sky exploration to the Sky Realm in Breath of the Wild 2, I wouldn't be shocked to think of maybe there are other connections. And you're right, it does sort of glow a similar blue in the most recent footage. So, I mean, I think it's very clear that they're going to be exploring more of a story about the Master Sword this time around than they did in the first one. So...
Okay.
I don't know if they're going to... If we're gonna literally have like Fi come out of the sword and we're gonna communicate with her, that would be nuts.
It'd be nuts.
But there could at least be another reference to her in this game. Like, I think that's like the bare minimum, maybe. I don't know. I mean, the bare minimum is it just glows blue and that's it, right? But I think there's a decent chance that we could hear that voice again.
What if she leads? Don't you have to put the Master Sword into like purifying flames in Skyward Sword, and the temples in like a big part of that?
That's
game?
when they are forging it into the Master Sword. Yeah.
Yeah. So it could be that Fi tells you where they are, like where the temples that they've used to forge are. Maybe they're actually still there somehow.
Maybe. And I don't know. I don't really necessarily like this theory, but I'm gonna bring it up because I guess it's a possibility. The green hand, some people suggested that maybe that's like the hand of a previous hero. And if it is the case that it's from a previous hero, and by previous hero I mean another Link, maybe the Master Sword, aka Fi, remembers this previous hero, and there's a communication between them.
Oh.
Yeah.
That could be interesting.
Yeah, I don't know if I believe that,
yeah.
But maybe there's something to that. That I don't think it's a huge stretch. So that's something to consider there. But let's check in the chat. Let's see what you guys have been saying. I know a lot of you guys have been bringing up different Zelda ideas here. B. James, sky, underground, underwater, dungeons. That's a lot of development time just right there. Plus a refreshed overworld, new story, cutscenes. There's a lot. There was also a new village with like miniature people or something in concept art that might be in the game. I'd love that they were to go back to that little people idea, because there was an idea for little people which are reminiscent of Minish Cap. They didn't call them Minish when they talk about that concept art, but it could be They could bring that idea. There's a number of ideas that they could revisit, and I'm sure there's gonna be a lot of new ideas too. So for sure. David Haney said everyone hit that like button. I agree. Everyone hit that like button.
Yeah.
That'd be appreciated. Unless you've already hit it, leave it hit. Gabriella, I feel like the sequel will be more of a continuation story, but probably incorporating ideas last minute. That's part of what's taking so long. Maybe they're listening to fan feedback. I don't know. I don't think they.
Without the stories, anything do that. I'm sure the story's already pretty much done.
Yeah, well, I mean, there isn't. We don't know what, like, different. There's different ideas. Sure. I don't think there's any last minute sort of like. I don't know. Like it's.
I don't think Nintendo would ever delay a Zelda game for just the story alone.
Well, I don't think Gabrielle is necessarily referencing just the story. I think just different ideas in general. But yeah, it is a continuation of the story. But what ideas could they be incorporating? I mean, it could just be that. Like, I don't know if they're necessarily last minute, but they just have some grand ideas that they want to incorporate that would perhaps make certain, like maybe like. So, for example, I don't think that they're coming up with a whole other, like, oh, let's just add a whole other third of the world, in the last month. They're like, well, let's just delay it 4 months so we can do that. I don't think it's like that. But maybe, for example, they have this really cool mechanic they've been working on, but then there's a few ideas that come up. They're like, hey, wait, we can kind of expand upon this a little bit to make it better. If a few things like that occur, then maybe, it can sort of lead to eventually that decision. But I don't think it's kind of like they have a completely new entire department of the game they decide to add. Or maybe, I don't know. I'm not a part of the team, so hard to say. Joshua is saying, yeah, and that chest only has rupees in it. So this is referring to the chest that's underwater that you can't actually access. Imagine it had something like a hook shot or something. That'd be crazy. B. James, the underwater swimming in Skyward Sword was kind of crappy, so maybe they can perfect that in Breath of the Wild too.
Remember it being bad in Skyward Sword?
Now, some people had problems with it because there's like the whole motion thing. Yeah. There's not going to be motion swimming in this one, or at least it doesn't have to be.
Bring back the original Majora's Mask swimming, please.
Yeah. Amber Abalama, there's a glitch in Lower Lane Village where you can see under the water. There's all kinds of plants and coral shells and sand. Right? It's very detailed, right? That environment, for sure. Moving on. If you guys add me, it's a little bit easier to kind of see what question or idea you want to present. Gabriella, so I'm playing through Breath of the Wild again and noticed in the tapestry of 10,000 years ago, Zelda character is the only one with the Triforce in front. Interesting, right? Why is that actually the case? Actually, now I'm curious. I'm literally going to Google it. Breath of the Wild tapestry. I'll share it so you guys can see. I thought I was. I'm just zooming in. This is kind of a blurry version. This is not a high res version, but I would need a high res version. Maybe this one's high res. Cause you can like zoom in and then it's just like no.
Yeah, it's just like blurry and compressed.
Yeah. All right, so I'll show this one. I'll share it on stream for you guys. So let me see here. Give me a moment so it can show up.
Oh.
There we
Black
go.
box, very nice. Very
Yeah,
nice.
you gotta love the black box. Well, there it is. Yeah, there's a Triforce in front of Zelda and not in front of anyone else. So, there you go.
Yeah, she just has the whole Triforce.
Yeah. Which just basically just how Breath of the Wild took place, right? So,
Right, yeah.
Not that doesn't necessarily mean anything for Breath of the Wild 2. But, you know, in Breath of the Wild, it's sort of just following in what is suggested by this tapestry. So, yeah, you know, definitely something to consider, for sure. Let's see here. Let me get back to the chat.
Interesting point, for sure.
Let's see here. Continue on the chat here. Let me see if I can catch up. BJ, there's a lot of new stuff. That bow in the latest clip of Link's face and the wardrobe, his shield is different. Also, the dragon flamethrower attached to his shield. Right, like how is that dragon flamethrower thing going to work out? There's a lot of interesting things we've seen, or a lot, even though a little, right?
Yeah. I'm not even sure what you're referencing, to be honest. I didn't see that.
Kitano Tatsu, there's no clear evidence that his crypt is below Hyrule Castle. It could be that he moved to the castle after being reawoken. It seems to be...
That is fair, but...
We don't know. To your point, we don't actually know what is going on there. Now, I'll say that when you fight Calamity Ganon in Hyrule Castle, everything breaks, and there's like this weird sort of red dome Sheikah environment under the castle. Why is that there? Like, obviously, from a design perspective, they needed an arena, but why? Like, from a story reason, how does that make any sense? Like, what are the implications of that? Why is this here? So it's kind of interesting that that's like that. And actually, you know, this is a bit of a tangent, but I just want to kind of make reference to this. The domes that we see in there, and also when we're getting the Master Sword powered up with the DLC, those like domes almost look like sort of like they're domes, but if you look at them, they're also like constellations. And what's fascinating about that is that the Sheikah do give off vibes of ancient aliens. Like, we already know they've played around with alien ideas with both Breath of the Wild and in previous games like Majora's Mask.
Tons of concept art for that.
But also, the Sheikah, from sort of like a design perspective, they almost look like, I want to say, kind of like ancient Egyptian, Mayan, Aztec sort of like designs. And there's been a lot of speculation in the real world, or conspirators, conspiracy theories that like aliens helped the Egyptians or the Mayans in the past, right? And they always assess and analyze the sky and the constellations. Now, so like there's very clearly a connection there, right? So with this sky realm in Breath of the Wild 2 and this castle rising up, could perhaps those ideas come, you know, be brought to the forefront? Like, could there be more ideas? Perhaps maybe the Sheikah aren't even actually from Earth or Hyrule. Maybe they came many, many years ago and they were actually an alien race, right? Like, what if that sort of is suggested in the story? Or what if, like, things get so high in Breath of the Wild that like we're like in the outer reaches of the atmosphere where you see a clear view of space, and maybe there are other elements to that, you know? What if the dragons we see in Breath of the Wild are actually space dragons because they literally go through a portal high up in the sky? Like, they could get crazy with this is my point here.
They definitely could.
Say that again, Brandon.
I think they definitely could get crazy. Like, there's a lot of ideas and just lore that they could explore here.
Mm-hmm. Right. There's a lot they could do there. But anyway, kind of going back before I think that's enough of that specific. We could go in that direction, but we're not going to talk about ancient aliens too much more, unless someone brings up an interesting idea. But going back to like simply like Ganondorf being under the castle, like what, like we don't know.
I would say it seems as if. I mean, the malice clearly like seems to generate from below the castle. I think in the second trailer, don't you see malice shooting out?
Right, it does sort of erupt like straight through from under. Right. Now, the question is it possible that Ganondorf simply has like a lock on like the underground network of Hyrule, and it just rushes through like these different tunnels and it shows up there because that's where he wants it to show up? Or is he just straight up under there? Like, and if he is straight up under there, who put him there? Like, who would put him right under Hyrule Castle? That's a consideration, right? And the other, actually, So in Skyward Sword, the Skyloft, or the piece that the goddess statue,
Right.
closes down on where Demise was, and that's sort of where Hyrule is built from. So I could see how there could be some mental leaps to think that maybe this is somehow an allusion to Demise, if that's all kind of there. But that's not, Demise is not Ganondorf,
Right.
though, right? So that's where there's kind of like
Right.
a bit of a disconnect. Not to mention, in the Great Plateau, there's already evidence that there was that used to be the old sort of like castle town too. Like, there's actually a lot of interesting things that are not entirely explained in Breath of the Wild. That could be a video series, but anyway, there's honestly a lot of mystery here, and perhaps the answers to it all is that Nintendo just did some random stuff and it just doesn't make sense. But you know, to your point, Brandon, we do see a lot of the mouths coming out from under the castle. So
Yeah.
the immediate thought is, yeah, maybe he's just straight up under there. Not to mention, I think with the initial attack, it also came from like around the same place too. Like Hyrule Castle was taken over from by surprise. Like it came from under the castle initially.
Right.
So maybe he's just always been there. And in fact, maybe the reason why Link and Zelda go down there is like, you know what? That malice came from under Hyrule Castle. Maybe we should check it out. That's what I'm really curious
We should
of.
explore why there's a gigantic arena to fight Ganon in.
Yeah.
Underneath the castle.
Maybe that is the inciting incident. Maybe Link and Zelda are talking about the fight and they're like, "Hey, so you fought in this dome. Why was that there?" And she's like, and she thinks about it. It's like, you know, my entire life growing up at the castle, I never saw that there. And maybe that's what leads to it. I'm very curious, what is the inciting incident that leads to Link and Zelda exploring underground and finding Ganondorf? I'm really curious about what events lead to that. It could be what we just talked about. It could be something entirely different.
All we know at the end of Breath of the Wild is that I think it's Vah Rudania is shut off or something. It's not working properly.
And they're going to go give their condolences to the King Zora because Miph is dead. 100 years later.
Right.
Yeah.
So like, and obviously it seems all the Sheikah tech disappeared. So maybe they saw it going underground, and maybe it going underground opened up a hole, like where there was a passageway where they could go further, and they were like, "Oh shit, what's down here?" Right.
Maybe the reason they're underground is because they want to find out what happened to all the Sheikah technology, including Vah Rudania, right? That stops working, and all the Sheikah technology goes back underground. They're like, okay, why to go back underground? Why is this stuff not working? Let's go underground and find out.
Yeah.
Could be that simple. It's actually kind of cool how that makes complete sense, because there's this vacant Sheikah technology. Why is it vacant? What's going on? It all goes underground, which would explain why Vah Rudania is not working. Which is also a perfect reason for them to explore underground, find the crypt, find Ganondorf, and everything ensues. But the other fascinating thing, Zelda gets lost into a dark hole, suggesting she goes even deeper underground, where the Sheikah technology supposedly goes down under, which she's meant to explore. And we're already talking about how like there's potentially this sort of theme of the return of the Triforce parts. So Zelda needs to find the Sheikah stuff, which is the blue Triforce of Wisdom, right? Then you still have Ganondorf with the red Triforce of Power, and then Link with the green energy from the trailer, the missing Zonai, Triforce of Courage. This all could fit really well. So, you know, I don't know if this is exactly what's going on with Breath of the Wild 2, but it kind of fits. Which is exciting.
It's a working theory.
Yeah, it works for now. If anyone has any counter arguments, please bring it in the comments. Let's see here. There's a lot of comments, so I'm just going to focus on the ads for now so we can progress. But if you guys want me to address a specific thing, I will, kind of get to it. Core, do you think we'll get a Xenoblade 3 Direct when we get close to the launch? That's a tough call because I feel like we haven't been getting that many game-specific directs recently.
Yeah.
What's happened is they simply sort of give us like updates, and then there's like a big overview trailer. Like a 4 to 5 minute trailer comes out a few weeks beforehand. Honestly, I think that works better I don't really like
think
the
game
game-specific directs.
ones are good for like new concepts or like something that's maybe they need to actually explain more or something that needs more time.
Yeah.
But like Xenoblade, I mean, it's the third game in that trilogy. We pretty much know what like the basics of what Xenoblade is. It's not like we're gonna be completely like out of our depth trying to understand what's going on.
Yeah, no, and also when I say I don't like game-specific directs, I might only be saying that because I don't like game-specific directs of games that I'm not that into.
Right. Now give me a Breath of the Wild specific direct, and you know.
Yeah, I'll take in every little detail there. I'll watch it several times over. It depends on the game. Like there are games that I still like, but I don't necessarily care to watch the whole thing. I get every little detail there. So I'm not. That's what I care about, but it doesn't mean what Nintendo should do, right? Nintendo's thinking about how to appropriately market their game. But to Brandon's point, there is already a Xenoblade 2. There's already a definitive edition, and there's DLC. Like, do they need to have another direct to sort of talk about specifically Xenoblade 3? They're gonna talk about Xenoblade 3 multiple times throughout the year. That's gonna happen, but it's a question of will it have its own dedicated direct. I'm gonna say no. Like we didn't see one for Metroid Dread, for example, and they are hard pushing and marketing Metroid Dread.
Oh yeah,
and they were hard doing that, but they didn't do it with a Metroid Dread specific direct. When was the last time we had a game specific direct? I think Monster Hunter, but Monster Hunter is also like a third party thing, so I think that's kind of part of simply like marketing that game.
I'm trying to think of a one game specific direct.
Maybe not since
because we've had non-general Nintendo directs, but
Animal Crossing didn't have its own direct.
Yeah.
There was an
Animal Crossing had a direct for the DLC, didn't it? Or was that just a? How did they announce the DLC? Wasn't that in a? Or no, that was just in a direct, I think, wasn't it? I don't remember. I thought didn't it have its own presentation at one point?
So
let's see.
That's tricky. It kind of happened like.
I'm going to the Nintendo Direct archives.
Well, it didn't. The thing is, I remember that New Horizons was announced to be free with the expansion pack, which didn't happen in a direct.
Oh yeah, there was a New Horizons direct on the.
Yeah, and they probably announced. You know what I think? In the September direct, they probably announced that there would be something like that, and then they actually had it. So I mean, yeah, I guess there could still be a game specific direct for Xenoblade Chronicles 3. I'm just not sure they're going to do that. I'm not committed either way though. I think if I had to guess, I'm gonna say no. But like it's like 55-45. Like it could go pretty much either way. Either way, Nintendo's gonna be talking about Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Like they're gonna talk about it. Yeah. There's gonna be a treehouse, I bet. It's probably gonna be heavily showcased in some sort of direct during the summer. There will be an overview trailer. There will be news leading up to its release. That all is all guaranteed. Where there's gonna be a lot of information for the game. They're just not sure if it'll all happen in a single like specific direct.
So the last published Nintendo game to get a game specific direct, other than Animal Crossing, which got 2, is Mario Maker. Back in 2019.
There's a lot of games that have come out since then.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, then that's kind of where my hesitance lies. Like we haven't seen too many of them.
Now we did get a Xenoblade Chronicles 2 direct back in 2017. I don't remember about this, but apparently it happened.
Yeah, I don't remember that either, but it happened. So. Yeah, tough call there. I'm gonna say I'm gonna say probably not. I'm transitioning to 60-40. 60% saying no, but let's move on. Where are we in terms of time? Okay, we got another about 38ish minutes. J.R.R. Tolkien. My theory: Breath of the Wild 2 will be both the sequel to Breath of the Wild and the prequel to Skyward Sword. Book it. Suggesting that it's like a cyclical time thing, and it sort of resets time. I don't think so, but. Maybe. There could be some weird time stuff. It's not impossible. I don't think so again, but maybe.
It's possible.
B. James. Koroks also have to be replaced, so how do we upgrade our weapon slots if we are not giving seats So it has to, like in Breath of the Wild, everything has to be reinvented. Everything.
Yeah.
I don't know, because Link's hand is also damaged and the Master Sword is there. Does he always have the Master Sword on him? Like, we're not entirely sure how items and weapons are going to be handled this time.
Weapons in the game, they're just like, nope, they not exist anymore.
Yeah, what if it's just
That's
energy
insane.
weapons? The concept art kind of suggests that. It was an idea for Breath of the Wild. What if that idea is taking place in Breath of the Wild too?
A lot of people were against the destructible weapons. I personally liked them, but maybe they were like, "Oh, we'll try something different this time."
Yeah, you don't get weapons this time around. You just have like an infinity energy weapon that's everything. Maybe.
Yeah, one could like shapeshift into other, like one that. Oh, it would be cool if you had a weapon that could like change into an axe and then change into a spear and like change into different things.
Now the thing is, we know Link has normal bow, right? So I think that implies that there probably are still weapons and items and stuff like that.
I would imagine like that would be a huge change that I personally don't think would be a good one. But
yeah, because I mean,
possible.
Having different items and weapons to acquire makes the game fun because there's more. It's more treasure options, more things to get excited about.
I want them to go harder into that. I want to be able to like upgrade my weapons and repair them at shops and like forge my own weapons out of materials I find around the world. Like, I want to be able to do more.
Yeah. Let's see here. Joshua Ayers. I might be one of the only few that doesn't want Breath of the Wild 2 to be so much like Horizon Forbidden West. Underwater exploration might be too much. I think stick to sky, land, and underground.
I mean, Zelda's been doing underwater exploration for a long time in 3D. So,
like, I know in Forbidden West they made it like kind of like a big deal, like they're expanding to underwater exploration. I don't think we have to make a big deal out of it. It just could be like one of many elements that is added.
I don't think Nintendo really should or does care what features they add to Horizon Forbidden West. They're like, they focused on underwater exploration. They stole our ideas. We can't implement that. It's like, just because it's an open world game with that you go underwater doesn't mean it will be anything the same.
Yeah. I'm not too worried. I think whatever they do, it's gonna be fine. Now I will tell you, I do want more sea exploration in general, though. I'd love it if you can maybe even construct more, like, you know how you have the raft? What if you could build a raft or build something more complex than a raft and have a little ship harkening to Wind Waker? And what if there are pirates, Gerudo? What if there's like, there are the Gerudo, but there are other Gerudo variants that are pirates, which is sort of bringing us back to Majora's Mask.
Exactly.
And you can do battle with the pirates. Maybe there's like a pirate town, you know, like it'd be really cool, right? So, you know, and that expands the region a little bit. Like, you go further out to the sea, there's a few islands and towns over there. There's a whole pirate community.
Sailing Breath of the Wild's surprisingly fun because it's so fast. Like, you get a coral leaf and you can just zoom.
Yeah. And imagine if you can expand on that. What if you can even get like an engine too? Like, if it's built out of like Sheikah technology or something. Like, there's different things that could be done. Like, they could go in a lot of different directions with that. And that's just on the surface. But if they do that, then they can give us more like underwater bosses. Like, I thought it was cool how in the land there were certain like land overworld bosses, right? But then in the desert they gave us I forget its name. You know,
I know what you're talking about.
The giant sandworm.
The Moldugas.
The Moldugas, correct. And there was like the Great Molduga as well. But they didn't have anything for the ocean.
We need a Kraken or a giant.
Yeah, like, they already had it in Wind Waker, right? Give us more of that. So, you know, I'd like to see more overworld bosses.
Oh yeah, just in general, I'd like to see more overworld bosses.
And on that note, sky overworld bosses too.
Right.
Maybe like,
I have a feeling we've seen one of them already.
The green thing? You think that's an over? It's like in the sky realm.
Yeah,
but I meant like literally in the air. I meant like a flying beast.
Oh yeah.
Because based off the pattern, just suggesting be a lot of flying combat. So, you know, but both, right? To your point, like the sky realm can have overworld bosses, like the actual land you walk in. But then, literally, what about in the sky? as you're exploring the sky, what if there's just like sky whales or sky dragons or something else? Something weird.
Yeah.
Be cool.
A dragon would be awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. Nish Quick Pops. Will Breath of the Wild 2 have a treehouse this summer, you think? Maybe. Hello there, Yellow Kazoo.
Yeah.
Yeah, I it's see that's another kind of video idea I have in the background.
Just like in gameplay, yeah.
So we'll get to that because
right.
Yeah, I do appreciate that you said this summer. You didn't specify E3 because E3 has been canceled. That is like the next topic here. So we're gonna touch on this in a few moments. Let's see here. Moving on. I feel like we've pretty much caught up with the chat here. So let's get into the next topic here, which is still semi-Zelda related. So, you know, and if you guys have more Zelda questions, feel free to put them out there. But we got another 30 minutes to the show. We got to talk about the other topic, which is E3 getting canceled. Good evening, Whooper. I see you there. Thanks for modding. So yes, E3 was announced to be canceled. What does this mean for Nintendo? We know there's going to be the Summer Games Fest, and most big companies are actually going to be a part of it. I think even Xbox is going to be a part of it now. And last year, Xbox was not
actually good.
Yeah. So
last year the Xbox was at E3.
right. So we're kind of waiting to see if Nintendo joins the Games Fest. If Nintendo joins the Games Fest, then it's going to be big.
Won't. I don't know. Will either, unless they already have. But
who? Sony?
Sony.
Yeah, they are actually.
Oh, are they really? That's
Well, let me see if I can look that up for you. I think summer. Well, perhaps I shouldn't be searching it on Twitter. I should be googling. Oh, I think I liked something that kind of had the.
Made it to the website. Let's see here.
Yeah, they might have a list of just every company already involved.
Oh yeah, they got their partners. I'm just looking through. Let's see. Why is Netflix gonna be there? I guess maybe that's a sponsor. Probably. Yeah, I see Xbox. I don't see Sony. No. Unless I am blind.
You could be blind.
Could be blind.
Yeah, I don't think that's a stretch.
Oh, I do see Sony. It was their PlayStation kind of logo instead of the Sony name.
Yeah, I see it now. Yeah, so they got Sega, they have PlayStation, they have Steam, Ubisoft, Xbox, Warner Brothers, Square Enix, Bandai Namco, Saber Entertainment, Capcom, Blizzard, 2K,
Warner
Activision,
Brothers,
EA, Devolver, Epic Games, Gearbox. Yeah, there's a lot. So, you know, pretty much like we're just missing like Nintendo.
Yeah.
So Summer Games Fest may just kind of effectively replace E3. So, you know, like it may not even really be that big of a difference for us. We'll see how things sort of pan out there. Now, to Brandon's point though, maybe Nintendo does not get involved. Does that mean we don't get a Summer Nintendo Direct? Because normally we get an E3 Direct. Does that mean Nintendo waits? And
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. Now, because they're not going to be participating at E3, they're not necessarily being held to a particular date. So maybe we wait a little bit longer for it. But at the same time, like, I don't think
it's a good time to talk about games in general.
I don't think you want to go that much longer, right? Because the thing is, like, September is in the 9th month of the year, right? And the February Direct is the 2nd month of the year. So that's sort of like a 5-month. Like, you don't want to go too long without more information.
I mean, there's just games we don't have release dates for either. I mean, they could just announce them via trailers and stuff, but there's a couple of them.
But let's just be real. Directs bring the hype. Like that's where it's at.
Yeah.
I don't think Nintendo's gonna
That's where
stop
it's
doing
at.
directs just because E3 was canceled. Like they have 3 major
And-
directs in a year. I think they still want to do that. That's still perfectly fine. Like I mean, point is, they've separated themselves from E3 already. Like they just do the direct digitally, right? And then they've chosen to associate themselves with E3, and they still do like Treehouse stuff. Like none of that should really be different for Nintendo. So they may still announce a direct, and they may still announce Treehouse stuff around the same time they normally do. So from that perspective, nothing may be different at all, really, just but the name. They may just call it Summer Nintendo Direct, or like, you know, Nintendo Direct whatever, right?
Right.
Maybe they play around with the marketing a little bit this time around as opposed to just a date, because they used to have the E3 branding. So that's kind of like the one sort of caveat, but I don't think you know, there's gonna be. I don't think we should be worried about Nintendo having that information. Now, I will reiterate though that it's possible that maybe they do wait a little bit later, maybe they do it a little bit earlier. They can't afford to do that since they're not locked to E3. It's gonna be interesting to see if Nintendo does sort of, you know, pony up or join the whole Summer Games Fest thing, because all the other major companies have. If Sony and Microsoft have done it, Capcom, EA, it will be weird if Nintendo doesn't. But also, it's Nintendo; they can get away with it.
Yeah, they just do whatever they want sometimes.
Yeah,
a lot of the times.
I'm not sure. They're probably thinking about. I think Nintendo's usually more cautious than the other companies to sort of include themselves with other companies, right?
Yeah.
So that could be why it hasn't been announced yet. There's simply more discussion there, more caution there.
It's run by Jeff Keighley, right?
Correct. I mean, and there's
Nintendo
communication.
has a presence at Game Awards usually, so.
Yeah, so I mean, they probably still will be there, but maybe they're also thinking about the timing of things and what works for them. So I think part of the whole Summer Games Fest things they have to coordinate, and perhaps Nintendo doesn't want to coordinate with them. You know,
maybe.
It's tough to say.
At this point, they're not on. I wouldn't be. I honestly, I don't know. Just my gut feeling is that they won't attend.
Yeah, I'm not committed either way. Regardless, though, I do believe that we will get information around that time. They could conceivably have us wait a little bit longer, but I think that would be a mistake.
Well, they almost always have the directs in September. I don't think they're going to change that this year.
Yeah.
I mean, that stuff's like clockwork.
Right.
Even during 2020, we got a September direct.
I think they should
Wasn't a
just.
general
I
direct,
think
but
they
it
should
was
just
there.
stick to the 3 direct format. February directs, June directs, September direct. It works. It works. That's all you really need, right? And the gap between September and February is a little bit longer, but it's also a slower time because all the games at that point you're really just playing the games that have come out, right, or that are coming out. Not to mention there's the Game Awards where sometimes there's a few announcements, so that helps to sort of carry them through there. I don't think Nintendo is going to want another 2020 like situation where there can't be a direct, and the only reason we didn't have one then had to do with the pandemic and them figuring out the messaging and marketing, coordinating all the different things that would be coming out and when they can announce them. So I don't think that we're going to be looking at a situation like that where we're waiting. It's June, okay, nothing. July, okay, nothing. Okay, August, maybe, right? September, I don't think we're going to wait that long. I do think Nintendo's probably is still going to have a direct, so I'm not too worried about it.
Yeah.
I am a little worried that we might have to wait a couple more weeks, but that's it. I think that's kind of like the worst case scenario. That Nintendo makes us wait until like July for like that. I think that's the latest we have to wait, because E3 is canceled. I'm hoping they don't make us wait until July. I'm hoping they do it pretty much the same time, early June. But we'll see.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see. I definitely think Oh, I mean, they could push it to July. I hope they do it in June still. I just feel like the timing there is best.
I think the
I
other
mean, there's
thing,
things they gotta talk about before like September, so they definitely can't wait till like a September direct. I don't think. I mean, technically, they could do whatever they want.
the argument for them kind of doing it around the same time they normally do is because in their directs it's not just Nintendo stuff, it's third-party stuff, and those third-party companies are probably going to want to announce their things when they're expected to be announced. So because of that, I think Nintendo if you think of it from that perspective, because of the third-party relations and those announcements and the expectation of those announcements, like the rest of the industry, is to make those announcements around early June. So because of that, regardless of whether Nintendo does associate themselves with Summer Games Fest, we're probably going to get that direct around then. I think that I didn't think about that before. It's not the Nintendo stuff that's going to make them wait. Or come earlier or do it on time. It's going to be all the third-party stuff because those are relationships and partnerships, and they're going to want those announcements at a particular time in a particular way. So it'll be weird to see a lot of third-party companies just to be okay with their announcements not happening with Nintendo, but happening with everyone else. So I think, yeah, probably still early June. Yeah. What do you think of that point, Brandon? Do you think that holds some water there, or do you think it?
Well, yeah, I mean, like third-party companies typically if they were already expecting E3, that was kind of when they were expecting to announce their stuff. So they would probably want to announce it relatively close. Who knows what they have planned? They might even had some like shadow drop stuff planned that they have to like change now. Like I feel like E3 is a big deal. It's a big event, and you schedule your announcements around that, and it changing all of a sudden can definitely affect things. And maybe Nintendo wants to try to keep things as similar as possible, so they don't have to change as much. So they want to keep that timing more similar.
Yeah. I think kind of talking it over more, I think it's more likely than not that they're going to kind of stick to the basic schedule. Yeah.
Now, one question I did want to ask, and this is kind of a merging of the two major topics for today.
Yeah.
Does the delay for Breath of the Wild 2 mean we won't see it in a summer direct presentation?
Totally possible. And I'll even say plausible. Like it's yeah. I think there's a certain degree of reason to think that it will not be in the June direct.
That
I'm not going. Yeah, you make your point.
The delay for the original Breath of the Wild didn't change the fact that of course that was the Wii U situation. They had nothing else to talk about, but they still talked about Breath of the Wild. Obviously, like they still showed that off. Delaying a game into the spring, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to like not acknowledge it at all. They talk about spring games all the time during E3.
I mean, if we go back to 2016, that's exactly what the Breath of the Wild situation was.
Yeah. So they clearly talk about Zelda very far in advance already. So the fact that I feel like they kind of, even though it's been delayed by seemingly a few months, I feel like they still need to talk about it. I don't think that they're going to want to blow out Breath of the Wild in like a September direct,
Yeah, I mean, I'm still in. Well, the thing is, because E3 is canceled, we do have to sort of wonder: will they have the same level of sort of significance, or will the summer direct kind of become sort of like basically around the same level as the September or February direct? I'd like to think that the summer direct is still like the big direct, right? Like the biggest direct of the year. But that's I mean, for example, the February direct this year was just like ridiculously good. There's so many announcements. It's gonna be tough to follow that up. Yeah. I think still, I think more likely that I think if we have to bet, I'm gonna say Breath of the Wild 2 still is at the direct. To your point, if the game is still coming out in spring, then they're gonna have to still talk about it. They still have to do that. Like for example, with Breath of the Wild, it was still a big showcase, even though it was also announced to be delayed around March of 2016. It came out a year later. Same deal here, right? Same thing with Animal Crossing, right? It was still showing off at the E3 before it came out, even though it was delayed until next year around March. So yeah, I mean, there's precedent there, and also the point you've made multiple times is that E3 is usually the time to show off Zelda, right? Even though it's not going to be E3, it's still good. We're hopefully sort of hoping, assuming it's still like the time. Say that again.
Well, yeah, there's 2 delays that just happened, or 1 delay that just happened and a cancellation. So E3 got canceled and Breath of the Wild got delayed very recently. So I feel like before both of those events happened, they were 100% like scheduling their Breath of the Wild showcase, their blowout of the sequel to Breath of the Wild at E3. Like I feel like that was 100% the plan.
Yeah, I think I think you're probably right. I think either way they were sort of planning on doing that, and they need to talk more about the game. We can't. 8 seconds of footage of new footage isn't gonna cut it. So like we do need to do something. We need some more than that. So I think more like I do kind of thinking it over now. If we sort of talked about it, I do think that yes, we will still see Breath of the Wild 2 in a summer direct. I don't know if it'll be a huge blowout, but I think we get at least a title reveal with a new trailer.
I feel like they at least have to show us the main gimmicks of the game, like the main what separates this from the
It'd be nice to finally get a treehouse act for it, actually. That'd be great. So maybe we actually do get some sort of significant
directs with treehouse afterwards, even outside of E3 before, so they can do it again.
Yeah. And if there is a game that does get a game-specific direct that's coming out within the next year, it's Breath of the Wild 2, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, and Splatoon 3. Those are the 3 games that could get a game-specific direct. Anything else, I would say it's, again, thinking more about it, less likely. But yes, Breath of the Wild 2, probably. Fingers crossed. I mean, but
I don't want to be calling this the sequel to Breath of the Wild 2 after like summer ends.
Does this cancellation and then perhaps the rebranding of the summer direct impact anything else?
Trying to think of what else it would impact.
Well, some people have been speculating that maybe Metroid Prime 4 is finally shown off at E3. Well, no longer E3.
Right.
What about that?
I have a feeling... I don't think we'll see it. I think they'll show, like, Prime Remake, and, I mean, maybe they'll tease it. Maybe they will tease it. I don't know.
Yeah, like, why can't they do a thing where they give us a Metroid Prime Remake trailer, but then after the Metroid Prime Remake trailer, like, hey, so here's a quick glimpse of Metroid Prime 4 as well. I need to fix that. Whatever. Like, what if they do? What if they give us like a 10-second sort of like quick glimpse, and they give us a title or a release year? They say 2023.
Right.
They could do that. And I think what's interesting is we'll know. I think we'll know based off how they give us the Metroid information. If they start off with saying, "Hey, look, development for Metroid Prime 4 is still going well. We're still not ready yet, but we have something else to show you," then we're not getting Metroid Prime 4. But if they just go straight into showing off Metroid Prime Remake, then midway through that trailer, I'm gonna be like, Brandon, they didn't say, "Hey, wait for Metroid Prime 4." I think this means we're finally gonna see Metroid Prime 4.
They didn't immediately crush our hopes and dreams about information.
Well, I would prefer to say quell our expectations.
There you go.
But yeah. So we'll see. What I just said will only be relevant for about 90 seconds. When that time comes, hopefully this June. But yeah. So we'll see there. I do think, and this is all assuming Metroid Prime Remake is real and coming out. I do think it is. Right. So, and I do think it's gonna get announced in a summer direct.
I will say, I think they're gonna talk about something Metroid this year. I think they definitely want to keep up that momentum from Metroid Dread. I think they wanted to come up with that free DLC to give people a little bit, remind them again
Yeah.
this year that Metroid is a thing. And then at E3, I assume they were planning to show off another Metroid thing. So I think they'll still show it.
Yes.
I definitely think. I don't know. I have a feeling that they at least want to get out. Like, I mean, I've had this theory for a while, but like a 2D Metroid, some kind of Prime game, and then Prime 4, but all in like 1 year after each other.
Right.
2022 for Dread, 2023 for Prime, or 2021 for Dread, 2022 for Prime, and then 2023.
We talked about this a
Prime
while
4.
ago, and
Right.
it's looking to maybe be true. So we'll see, right? But like you look at like Breath of the Wild 2 and how long that's been delayed. We'd love to see Metroid Prime 4 in 2023, but will it?
Who knows?
Everything's always seems to take a little bit longer than we think. But I'll also say 2023 is already kind of longer than I thought we'd see Metroid Prime 4, right? So hard to say.
I'll take it over some of these games we're getting from other companies where it's sooner than we thought, but it like barely works.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I could see Metroid Prime 4 maybe coming out in 2024. Like I can see it. I think it's gonna be close. But that doesn't mean they can't show it off to us this year, right? If Metroid Prime 4 is of a similar scope to, say, Breath of the Wild, similar, I'm not saying quite the same, then, it could be one of those games that Nintendo does kind of show off more than a year in advance.
Could be.
Yeah. So we could still see it this year.
But yeah, I do think if they... You know what? I'm going to say, if they show off Prime Remake, they will at least, like, mention something.
I mean, they did it with
just what
Metroid
worked
Dread,
on Prime 4.
right? They did it with Metroid Dread last E3. They were like, hey, development for Metroid Prime 4 is going fine, but we have something else to show you.
Oh, yeah. They just mentioned Prime 4. I think they'll do something other than just mention Prime 4, though.
Like they've done just mentioned Breath of the Wild a couple times already.
Yeah.
For Breath of the Wild 2. So, will they do the same for Prime? I feel like you don't do it you don't do it twice in a row, usually. So I'm inclined to believe we do see something. But the bare minimum is another mention. But I think we get a little bit more than a mention at E3. I'm sort of warming up to the idea. Ever since we saw the concept art, because we don't know if it actually is, from the Retro Studios Twitter banner, I've been thinking that they are kind of gearing up for some sort of big promotional push here. So
I think it's just likely, seeing how much they promoted Dread really shows me that they're trying to hype up the franchise. And I don't think you just go that hard into Dread and then just not have anything for
we're on the same page here. The marketing for Metroid Dread, yes, it was for Metroid Dread, but it was bigger than Metroid Dread. It's for the Metroid brand as a whole.
Yeah.
Metroid Dread was a reintroduction of the Metroid series to the world. And the Metroid Prime Remake is going to be an introduction of the Metroid Prime variant of the Metroid series to the world. And this is all meant to gear up and properly prep people for what's probably going to be a very ambitious, very large in scope game that's going to be Prime 4. Because they're basically completely rebuilding the Retro Studios team for this project.
Yeah,
they're gonna want them to do
so many hires.
They're gonna want this to be a big deal. They're gonna want this to be successful. They're gonna want to follow up on it, I bet. Maybe not necessarily with another Prime game. Probably another Prime game if it's successful, but other things too. So I don't know. Maybe they are just kind of gearing this up to be the Metroid Prime developer. I think there should be a dedicated Metroid Prime developer, just for the record. So if Retro Studios is it, then it just got to get bigger so they can make more than one game at once. Like Monolith Soft, for example. Yeah. They are the dedicated Xenoblade developer, but they help out with a whole bunch of other projects. So, I think it should be like that. But let's check out the chat here before we close things out. Giancarlo added me. Nintendo might show Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 at the Game Awards 2022. I think there's a good chance. Yeah, I think the reason we didn't see it...
see a trailer there.
Right, yeah. I think the reason we didn't see it at 2021 was actually an indicator the game wasn't that close to being done, maybe.
I have a feeling at that point they were already suspecting they might have to delay it.
Right. Right, which is probably why it didn't show up. Because otherwise, it would have made the entire sense to do it. So maybe that's why they were a no-show then. But because Breath of the Wild 2 is supposedly coming out spring, assuming that's going to hold, then yeah, I think there's a good chance it does show up at the Game Awards. Now, does it show up at the Game Awards instead of E3? No. The Game Awards isn't going to be like a big major thing. It's going to be like a little supplemental piece of information of the game. We will have gotten a more proper introduction to the game and how it plays, with probably treehouse footage and a bigger trailer, probably in a summer direct time this June. Probably then. If not then there will probably, if there's not, actually I'll say this, if there's not a big Breath of the Wild 2 presence in Nintendo's sort of summer presentation time, there will be a dedicated Breath of the Wild 2 direct sometime this year. But I think it's gonna be at the direct with the treehouse.
I think so.
Yeah, I think there was a super chat that I missed from Taker610. Thank you very much for the super chat, Taker. Breath of the Wild 2 and Metroid Prime 4 AMD FSR on Switch, DLSS 4K on Switch 2. Yes. Maybe.
Yeah.
I think
probably.
We're seeing that resolution technique with Switch Sports is probably going to be another future Switch games from Nintendo, and whatever new hardware Nintendo's working on, be it a revision or a new Switch 2, I do think some sort of DLSS technology is going to be there, and it'll be to a much greater effect than what we're seeing with this software-based version.
Oh, I am curious if they'll use AMD's FSR for Breath of the Wild 2 or Metroid Prime 4. That is an interesting. That could happen.
Why not? I mean, you might as well take advantage of everything you can, right? So,
okay.
Yeah. Now, the thing to consider here, though, is that Retro Studios is developing Metroid Prime 4. So whatever sort of like techniques or tricks that are used for other Nintendo games, they're developed in the East, in Japan, in Tokyo. It may not translate to what Retro Studios is working on a studio in Texas here in the West. I'm not saying there isn't communication and things that cross over, but just saying there may be a bit of a difference there, right? Like, so a lot of different EPD groups may communicate and use different technologies together. They may not share that with Retro Studios. I'm not saying they wouldn't be willing, because it is still like in-house Nintendo, but there are going to be some differences, I think.
If anything, I mean, AMD's FSR is completely open source, so they could just look at it themselves if they want to use it.
Yeah, if they think it fits for them. Now, I do love the idea of Nintendo to continue to build Retro Studios and make it like basically effectively another EPD group. Kind of like Monolith. Like, that's what, like, Monolith is huge. Like, I want them to expand Retro Studios significantly. And now they also own Next Level Games, right? Like, and like they can do that. I think they will expand.
I don't know that Retro Studios need to be expanded quite to the level of Monolith Soft. I think Monolith Soft's a very special company.
I think Retro Studios should be expanded to the point where they're making games and coming out with them at least every 3 years.
Yes, I agree. I think that they should have enough people to where they can be working on 2, maybe 3 projects at a time. Yeah. Instead of just the one. I definitely think they should increase that, but I don't think they need to be like a 300-person team
with 5 to 6 different studios assisting with 7 different games at once. Yeah, like maybe not that, and maybe eventually, but yeah. The thing is, Nintendo will do that based off of need, right? So we'll see how things transpire.
It's also they're in the West, as you said before, so their usefulness as just a general EPD group for Nintendo would be much lessened. I assume they're hiring mostly like English speaking workers and stuff,
Yeah. So the communication is some limitation there, even though I'm sure a lot of Nintendo
they're based in
employees
Austin,
in Japan speak English, but it's probably at least their second language for most of them. There's a bit of a language barrier.
Japanese isn't exactly the easiest language to learn.
Yeah, that depends.
At least going from English.
Yeah. Kitanu Tatsu added me. I'm doubtful there would be a trailer for both Prime Remake and Prime 4 in a summer direct this year. It could cause confusion in a more casual market.
I really think so. Because I don't think they'll show like a full-blown trailer for Prime 4. It would be more of a tease thing.
Yeah, and that exactly. I think you took the thoughts right out of my head. That's what I think. It'll be more of a smaller tease. not a full-scale trailer like they would for Prime Remake. Prime Remake, I think, will even have like treehouse footage, you know. Prime 4 would just be more of like, hey, look, this is in the future, you know. And maybe also the Prime 4 reveal happens later, right? Maybe they'll say, hey, this is Prime Remake for now, more details later this year. See, that would be interesting. But you know, we'll see how that all kind of comes together. But anyways, is there any sort of final thoughts you have for tonight's discussion, Brandon?
Oh, man. I'm just hoping that Breath of the Wild doesn't get delayed again. You know what? I would be fine. Obviously, it's hard to complain at Nintendo for delaying something if it needs to be done, but I would be happy with another delay if it was specifically because they wanted to put it on like a next generation Switch or a Switch Pro or something like that. Like at this point, Nintendo, I almost want them to do that. Like, like imagine
that's what I want that too. Like I would love to play Breath of the Wild 2 in 4K.
Yeah. If there's gonna be like a 4K capable Switch coming out in 2023 or even like 2024, like it's so close.
But I'm not gonna wait till
2023.
I would like to believe that we are less than a year away from playing Breath of the Wild 2.
One would hope.
One would hope, right? But anyways, everyone, that is all for now. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. If you could leave a like, that'd be appreciated. If you could share the stream, that'd be appreciated as well. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. Or join as a member if you haven't done that before. There are some benefits there. But also make sure to check out Brandon. You can find him on Twitter, What About Narb, or you could just check out his video that he posted a while back. But that's all for now, everyone. Take care. See you later.
Bye, guys.